All right. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Um, it's my honor and pleasure to welcome everyone to another STR virtual event on generative AI as a research tool. And today we will talk about and learn from our panelists about directions for strategic management or the broader management area in general, what AI might mean as a research tool in particular, how it might shape research questions and how we conduct research. And um, this event is sponsored, as always, by the Membership Engagement Committee of the Academy of Management. And we will all hopefully see you at the Academy this year. Thank you to Andy Wu for sponsoring this event, who is also in the audience. And I would like to draw attention and say a big welcome and thank you to our four very distinguished panelists, which is like a great panel to have, all four of which have like deep expertise in generative AI on the teaching side as well as on the research side. And I'm very excited to learn from all of you. So let me introduce briefly each of you. Vivianna He is here today. Felipe Csaszar, Gwen Lee, and Phanish Puranam. So thank you everyone for taking the time. I know we have like a lot of different time zones today on the panel, so I really appreciate it. So without further ado, I would hand it over to Vivianna to get us started for the first 10 minutes. Let's stop sharing.
I need to start sharing.
Wonderful.
Does it work now?
Yes.
All right. So I'll get started. We have a lot of experts here on the panel. Thanks for having me. And I will focus on the new opportunities, and I trust my fellow panelists will cover all the risks. If we take the scientific process as consists of a few main steps, starting from the conceptualization of the research question to selecting measurements, and then use these measurements to collect data that will hopefully lead to the identification of robust patterns. And next, the explanation of these patterns, and finally, the communication of our findings. If we take this as the process, we will see that gradually we see AI and different algorithms start to take an important role in different steps. You can see that today only the conceptualization is firmly or mainly in the hands of human researchers. That's why I put Einstein there. The other processes can already be fully done by different algorithms. Actually, Phanish and I have a PhD seminar. We're also running a pre-doc camp this summer. And in that course, we will talk about the entire process. We're also trying to write more formally conceptual papers for the different process. We have a paper on the an algorithmic induction, that is, how do you use machine learning to identify the robust patterns. We're currently working on another paper, how do you use generative AI, different LLMs, to help you come up with robust explanations of the patterns that you have identified. Today, I want to focus on seemingly more trivial part, but I think that's the starting point of theorizing. That is the measurement. So I want to talk about what are the new opportunities these fantastic technology tools can help us better measure different constructs, and how that will enable us to ask new theoretical questions. And this presentation is based on two of my recent papers. One is about how do we integrate machine learning and multimodal data for entrepreneurship research. And the second one is how we can use a specific tool that's called algorithmic facial analysis to help us advance the theory of emotions. Today, I actually just want to make a really simple argument, and I think really the most important contribution of AI, so that includes machine learning and generative AI, is that they enable us not only to automate measurement, but they will change what we can observe and therefore what we can theorize. I want to make this argument in two steps. First, AI allows us to study old constructs in fundamentally new ways. And second, it allows us to study new constructs that are previously impossible. I'll use research on entrepreneurship to illustrate this, not only because this is the area that I'm most familiar with, but I really think this is an area that has both the theoretical needs and the empirical material for us to do so. So if you think about entrepreneurship, one of the very critical topic is how do VCs make investment decisions? And we know these decisions are under a very high level of uncertainty. And we know that investors respond not only to the content, but also to who is pitching. However, the current theories say not enough beyond just that, okay, VCs, they will bet on both the jockey and the horse. And that's despite there is a vast amount of multimodal data out there, including text, audio, image, and video. So we really need to understand the deeper mechanisms such as persuasion and evaluation that underpin these decisions under uncertainty. And we do have a lot of empirical data, multimodal data, to capture these processes. The bottleneck is really our human analysts' compute to systematically capture a lot of the constructs scale. So I want to use this context to illustrate a few things. My first claim is a more conservative one, and it's also something that we are familiar with. So AI allows us to revisit some of the constructs we really care about, but we cannot conceptualize them in as rich a way as we want to. For example, entrepreneurship research has often relied on a single modality, or it has simplified rich multimodal material into a few manually coded variables. For example, if we code those pitch videos into numerical values, we're really compressing a lot of rich information into a single modality. And that will give us something interpretable, but it also strips away a lot of the theoretically relevant information. Machine learning changes this because it gives us scalable and more reliable and more nuanced ways of capturing what is in different modality of data. One approach is what we call construct corroboration. That means we can use multimodality to measure the same construct more reliably or in a analytically deeper way. For example, founder confidence can be captured not only from texts, that's the content what they are talking about, but also from their voice, from their facial expression, or from their body language. So there are different modalities of data, and utilizing them will not only give you more insight, more reliable insight, but enable you to theorize from different perspectives. I will talk more about that later. And the second approach is what I call dimensional exploration. That's to use different modalities to unpack different dimensions of a familiar construct. I will also get into that using an example. And then the third approach is modality integration, meaning that we can use different modality for different constructs in one study. So when taking these approaches, machine learning algorithms will transform old constructs by making them multimodal, processual, and more granular. So what it really changes is from a single modality proxies to multimodal evidence, and from static average of to temporal trajectory, and from like a one-dimensional variable to a richer construct. Let's look at emotion, which is obviously not a new construct in management research. Traditionally, we often measure emotion in a fairly coarse way, either by self-report or by coding of video data, or some aggregate measures. But AI-based algorithm can analyze emotions in very different ways. For example, now we're not talking about just joy as something that we display once and then, or we report. By analyzing this video data using different algorithms, we will look at joy as this temporal construct that has onset, latency, peak, duration, and offset. So we can derive things like recovery life, meaning that once it reaches peak, how long does it take to offset? Then we can make claims about how emotions unfold over time, and our measures can match the type of theoretical claim. Just to be sure, the emotion theories in management often take these emotions as this dynamic process, and in a lot of the theoretical predictions, there is an innate temporal process to it. But the bottleneck has been the measurement, that we cannot measure this construct in the richer and the finer grained ways that can enable us to test or advance theory. So now, with the new tools at hand, we can ask new questions. For example, when did a positive emotion begin? How intense did it become? How long did it last? And we can also move on to the more relational hypothesis. For example, how does one's display affect investors, and how strong was the contagion effect last? Now, other familiar constructs can also become richer. For example, entrepreneurial passion may be visible in text, but video and audio can reveal additional distinctions such as style, intensity, and the kind of passion being displayed. More broadly, multimodal data really let us unpack constructs like confidence, passion, authenticity, and enable us to treat them not just as flat one-dimensional variables. My co-author and I have collected quite a few different algorithm tools that we can use for like capturing and analyzing different modality of data. Here you can see one table is about how do you detect and analyze facial expression. You have Effectiva, which is a very powerful tool. This is a closed source commercial product, but you also have DeepFace and OpenFace. Those are open source tools that are freely available to researchers. Beyond this single modality type of analysis, we can also integrate different modalities such as visual, audio data. So a lot of the video analysis algorithms help us capture constructs that traditionally relied on self-report or coding. For example, Big Five personality is something that you can directly capture from video analysis. Imagine if you have if you want to transform a large data set into really fine-grained variables, these algorithms are your best friends. Now, the second claim, so this is a more ambitious one, that's Those AI tools enable us to study new constructs that are previously impossible. And here I want to focus on two constructs. The first one is the display authenticity. This can enable us to theorize mechanism for trust and social evaluation. And the second one is alignment latency. This is the lag between one actor's emotional display and another actor's matching response. This could be a new relational construct for theorizing influence effectiveness or emotional contagion. So let me show you very concretely how this can be done. So if you look at these two pictures, one is the genuine smile and the other one is not. Can you tell which one is the genuine display? Left, right. So let's think about it. Authenticity has long mattered for theories of emotion, trust, impression management, but it has usually been very difficult to observe directly in interaction. If you ask people to self-report their authenticity, because of the social desirability, most people will say they're authentic. And for coding, this is a very subtle thing to code.
Viviana, we need to wrap up in order to keep time for the
sure.
other participants. Sorry about that.
No worries. I only have these two slides. So using machine learning algorithms, for example, Affectiva, we have one thing that we can measure concretely, that is the covariation of action units. And a genuine smile, you will have co-activation from the eye level and the mouth muscles, so they will co-activate. So this is something that you can very concretely capture. And with this, they will enable you to conceptualize authenticity differently and like really to a granular level. And the second example I will quickly go to is this alignment latency. So very often we are interested in emotional contagion, how effective it is. One thing we can do right now is to capture the latency between the onset of one person, for example, the entrepreneur's display of joy, and then the investor's display. And then we can ask question whether the shorter the latency, the more effective is the influence from one person to the other. And we can also ask whether like how lasting the influence is. Will that predict subsequent investment behavior? So with these two examples, I just want to make a very simple point that AI does not replace theoretical judgment, quite the opposite. The more powerful the tools become, the more we'll need strong theory to decide what to measure, how to interpret it, and why it matters. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Viviana. All right, we'll hand it over to Felipe.
Perfect. So let me share my screen. Can you see my screen? Perfect. Okay. Thank you all. Great seeing you all here. So I'll talk about opportunities and risks of AI-enabled research. I won't be talking so specifically about one tool, but more about the larger picture. So the goal is to think about these two sides, opportunities and risks. This will have to do with specific methods, with topics and concerns. And first, to acknowledge that there are downsides. Yeah. So for sure, I think journals will be drowning in submissions. Promotion standards will need to be rethought. And there will be efficiency gains for everybody. And that means that we will need to keep running just to keep up. But I think that that's a boring part. So let me focus more on the upside. So that's where we are going to spend most of the time in this conversation. So I think there are much more upsides than downsides. So the first one I would say is that strategy is part of the critical path to the development of AI. This really starts at the beginning of AI. There's a conversation in 1943 between the founders of essentially the information age, Claude Shannon and Alan Turing. And in the middle of the war, they meet at AT&T and they think about what's going to happen in the future. And they very quickly talk about AI. So Shannon envisioned an AI scientist. He said, I want to create like an artificial Einstein. That would be my hope. And then Turing says, no, but there's something that I think is more difficult, which is to create a CEO. And he says, I just want to create someone like the CEO of AT&T. Um, so, and the AI scientist arrived earlier. So we have today protein folding, theorem proving in mathematics, hypothesis generation in a number of fields. So we have AI scientists, but we don't have AI CEOs yet. Because it seems that the problem that Turing was trying to solve is more difficult than the problem of the AI scientist. Because being a COO is a language-rich task, uh, high stakes, where you have delayed feedback, where you have environments that you create, not only that you respond to. So we face a very complicated problem that AI still doesn't know exactly how to solve. So the things that we can say about it can push the boundary of AI. We're at the middle of a very important problem. Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, says, hey, this is a very important thought experiment for me. What AI will need to do in order to be able to do my job? And we, I think, are at a unique position to try to answer that. So that's opportunity one, very important, high stakes. The other one is that every time that there's a new technology, you break trade-offs. And in research, there are many trade-offs. You have scale, so how many cases you can study. You have scope, how many different cases. Rigor, how rigorously you can get into each one of those cases. Speed and cost. And AI will have an effect on all of these trade-offs. And as Viviana was saying, what this is doing is expanding the realm of things that we as researchers can do. So this is pushing the frontier. Many questions that we couldn't address now we can address. So huge opportunity. I think that it will take us decades to explore. So I think we will be very busy in the next few years because there are so many things to do and we are a given number of people. So I'm not thinking that we will get replaced. It's more that we will have a lot of fun in the next few years because there will be so many things that we will be able to do. The other one is that AI, in particular in our field in strategy, allows us to rethink core elements about how strategic decision making is done. So in all of the history of AI or of strategy, decisions in strategy were made by humans. Suddenly you can use AI to make part of them or to make them. So this creates a lot of opportunities. Here I have a couple of illustrations from my research. So in a paper, we thought, hey, there are two processes in strategy. You're always coming up with ideas and you're always evaluating ideas. These are two core processes in strategy. Come up with a strategy, and once you have multiple possible strategies, picking the best one. So we went and we tried to measure the ability of AI to do both things in the setting of business plan competitions. And there we showed that in that setting, AI was very comparable to humans. AI-generated business plans ended up a little bit above human-generated business plans, and the evaluations done by AIs were very similar to the evaluations done by the judges of the venture capital competition. So another, this is a working paper. Here, we think another key task in strategy is to make predictions about strategic outcomes, so strategic foresight. So this is not just being similar to the AI being similar to what an expert, let's say a venture capitalist would say, but being similar to what will happen in reality, matching reality. That's foresight, predicting what's going to happen. So here we have AIs and humans making predictions about things that haven't happened yet. And then we wait until those things happen and see how well AI and humans perform. And AIs in this task, which was about predicting how much money different Kickstarter projects would raise, was much better than humans at making those predictions. So every time an AI sees a pair, can predict 80% of the time correctly which one of the two will get more money, while for humans, this was closer to 60%. Um, but more generally, I think that for strategy, what AI is enabling is the second generation of a strategy process. So let's call it strategy process 2.0. Because what happens is that the core elements of the strategy process, of how people make decisions, how strategic decisions are made, the process of making those decisions will change because AI will allow us to have more complex frameworks. So AI is not bound by the same cognitive bounds as humans. So AI will be able to represent problems, more dimensions of a problem. AI can search faster than humans, and AI can search farther away. So for a key idea in strategy process that people do local search, AI can do something that's closer to more global search. And then aggregation will change. It's another key process. Now you can combine virtual personas, and you can have process where you have humans and AIs. Something interesting, I think, is that testing of these theories will become much faster because much of it will be testing software. So doing research in strategy process has been slow because you have to do experiments with groups of people, and there's a limit on how many you can use. With AI, you can expand that to now it happens with AI. So it's you're testing different ways of making decisions. You're testing the performance of software. I think two types of papers will emerge out of this that were not core but will become core benchmarks, how well an AI tool performs with respect to a human. And the other is software experience papers, how well a given software helps people make decisions. The downside, the risk, well, cheap intelligence will also lower the cost of doing bad research. So typical risk here will be homogeneity, everybody using the same tools, the same prompts. Complexity for the AI is very easy to add stuff, and then that leads to things that are hard to understand and that don't create insight. Those are the risks, I believe. I think the solution to the risk is to acknowledge that you are always the author. So anything that you publish, it's your reputation that's at stake. So you need to be sure that there are none of these problems in your research. Uh, the other thing is that we shouldn't make paper count the center of our attention, but it should be research quality. And I think that AI will make us focus more on research quality because AI will be able to read all of the papers, and then people will have to rely less on counts of papers and more on the content of paper, the quality of papers. Quality will continue to be the scarce resource, and that's the thing that we should try to focus on. And I think a very productive and positive way of thinking about this cheap intelligence is that it democratizes the research stack. Before AI, only rich researchers could have a lot of help with their papers. They could hire many RAs, many high quality RAs, many copy editors, many programmers. But now all of these resources are available to everyone. So in a sense, now we all become lab directors. And then the thing that we should try to do is to improve our skills at being lab directors. So the lab director skills are the things that are going to become the bottleneck. So picking the right research questions, connecting problems to tools, to literatures, having a vision and managing the process where you have all of these resources. And then just to close, we don't have to think we're so special. Yeah, I think that every generation gets a new technology, a new instrument. What matters is what we make with it. So Simon and Newell, for example, they had the mainframe, and then they came up with their theories about decision making. Rumelt had access to CompuStat. That was a new thing. And for example, Duncan Watts, to have something that's closer to strategy, but it's not strategy, well, he had access to the early internet. And they all did interesting things with that. And now we have access to Gen AI. So don't just write lit reviews faster, but use this new tool to ask questions that were impossible 5 years ago. That would be my recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Felipe. Wonderful. Um, I'll hand it over to Gwen.
All right, so it is my pleasure to get started. This is a very interesting set of ideas. And so I'm going to try my best to take everything in the given amount of time. And hopefully you can raise more questions if there's anything you would like to get to know further. So my position is generative AI is a research tool that is going to disrupt. It is going to disrupt how we define and discover knowledge. So the way I think about it is that knowledge discovery has major these steps, and they have very much been impacted by Gen AI from ideation to verification. In the interest of time, I won't be able to go through all of these, but Vivianna gave very great examples. For example, the middle one, the multimodal transcription. Voice to insight really is getting automated fast. You can transcribe interviews, whether it's voice, video, and you can do it in real time, and you can cross-reference with archival interviews. So not only with the transcription as a task that is getting automated, we also have knowledge mapping, trend discovery, content extraction, and most importantly and interesting to me is the adversarial prompting. So these are the things that I think have enabled researchers, not just in strategy, but the scientific research overall. We are all facing these very exciting opportunities, just like how Vivianna and Felipe have mentioned. And I just want to point out that we need ethical guardrails. So we need to have algorithmic auditing to check whether the AI tool's thematic coding has biases, as an example. Also, data sovereignty. We need to keep sensitive data from leaking to the public cloud. So these are important things as researchers. But what I would like to emphasize more is to push for the further afield discussion. And that is for us to think about AI disrupt what we mean by discovering knowledge. So based on the previous two examples, I get the sense that mechanism clarity, theory, very important, and humans explain why. But with AI can find truths that humans cannot see. So that is a way to think about AI making some tasks more economic. So the cheaper for literature review, coding, writing, searching, synthesizing, and humans, have excelled in judgment, right? That was what I concluded from the previous discussions. But strategy field must decide whether our goal is truth, even though it's very complex, or it's narrative, storytelling, right? That is something that humans are great at doing, but it may be incomplete. So there is this trade-off between whether we want to go for parsimonious, human interpretable theory, or we want to get at insights that are high-dimensional truths. And that means we need to overcome our discomfort, and also we have to be very humble in thinking about the cognitive limitations, what humans can understand and interpret. And so what I'm seeing in our field and overall in scientific research is a set of disruptions and paradigm shifts. It's really moving from trust me, I'm a scholar, right? So a lot of the essence that Felipe just talked about, and we need to move into the realm of verify me. Here's my code, right? So we're going to evolve robustness and reliability from right now, the current state. We put a repository of online appendices, a bunch of robustness checks. I personally believe, and I have been doing this with them, the research in thinking about robustness and reliability, and that's going to be verifications with open source approaches. That is the proof of compute, audits of executable codes. And then that means, we're going to be thinking about what we report and what peer review process will verify, right? And so that may push us into a different direction in thinking about, well, what is durable research, right? And what are some research questions that are more durable than others? And I also asked the question, why should we wait 3 years for a longitudinal study when a decade of organizational evolution can be simulated live with agents and robust research designs? So I'm going to talk about some of my more future-oriented type of thinking, but that is answering what Felipe was saying. What is some research that I wish I had been able to do, and now I finally have the tools to do that research? And my pitch is, this is living research. This is doing counterfactual simulations with synthetic agents. Okay, so what I pitch is to think about tools that are already out there. Felipe uses the synthetic agents, the silicon sampling, and this method allows for theory testing at scale before moving to expensive field experiments. So I'll just point you to this set of tools under Expected Parrot, developed by John Horton at MIT and co-authors. And they have this working paper that tells you more about what we can learn from Homo silicus. And I want to give credit to my colleague here at Purdue. I saw him demonstrate with how he got expected parrots to work, and Amir Sariri has been very important in helping me see how scientists work in real time and at scale. And what I think what would be interesting for our discussion today is to stop asking whether AI can write research papers. Let's start asking if AI can find the strategies we are too human to see. And so this is a bold claim. I think strategy field is moving from observational science to synthetic science. I'll give you 2 examples. The first one, Felipe already explained how he worked with his co-authors, Atticus and Daniel, in this use of large language models generating these Homo silicus, right? And they create these predictive engines and doing prospective prediction of fundraising success. And so the results I think are very interesting. Standalone large language models outperform the wisdom of the crowd ensembles and human AI hybrid teams. Another one example is what Felipe talked about, the software experience. And this is a paper that is in the Strategy Science special issue that Felipe and I and Todd and Peter have co-edited, and I encourage you to take a look. Today, I'll just be very brief. This is a software experience reporting on Aristotle, which is something that the authors have built. It's a multi-agent AI system that assists managers in theory-based strategic decision thinking. So you can read this further, but what I think is really interesting is that, this work abductively derive approaches that helps researchers get better at the design space of agentic AI systems, and to provide a methodological roadmap to help us think about AI system design choices. And this is very interesting to me because it helps me think more about my research. So I'm thinking how to go from selection to intervention, right? So Felipe talked about forecasting, and I'm thinking about taking action. And that is the distance between an AI's prediction and an organization's implementation. So I see Felipe's work as solving the problem of selection, right? Knowing which bets to place. If you have strategic foresight, then you have ability to predict outcomes and you have abilities to forecast who will win. And that becomes, the new and rare resource. And the Homo silicus, in importance terms, right, relies on high quality historical data to predict the future. But my thinking, and as a pushback, is that if every firm eventually adopts silicon sampling, then foresight becomes a commodity. And so to me, in the world where AI-driven foresight becomes a commodity, a firm's competitive advantage shifts to intervention. So that's why we go from selection to intervention. And with the silicon grout, you can identify, forecast when there could be a significant shock and an environmental shift. Then, that's where our theory and strategy says firms would respond by reconfiguring resources. But managers, in my opinion, need to evaluate these options, choices, right? So just like how Felipe talked about ideation, so idea generation and idea evaluation. So here is an evaluation of what if counterfactual scenarios for stress testing. Simply put, I contrast between prediction and action, selection and intervention. So simply put, Felipe is talking about the oracle, right? So it's a proprietary data set analyzed and used by LLM-driven foresight. And my thinking is the architect, is proprietary designs of the system, this predictive engine, and more specifically, a simulation engine, and managerial intervention. And so for the world of prediction, the advantage is informational, right? I see a trend, you don't. But in this action-oriented view, it is structural. I simulate what if counterfactual scenarios while you are still debating the data, right? So that is my simple view of the two ways of competing contrasts. And then I think the source of rarity shifts. It shifts from the silicon samples, the access to these unique human representative data, right? So data are the inimitable resources, but in the case of the architect, then it's the complexity of the design that is inimitable. So you have the design of the firm-specific multi-agent simulation engine that is unique to the firm. Now, of course, what we may do is that we can go further from silicon sampling and to do that for managerial intervention, right? So it's interesting how Felipe talked about lab directors. I'm thinking in that mode, synthetic causal lab. The lab stress tests internal policies of firms under 10,000 conditions, as many conditions as you want. And it's cast as a requiem environment. As soon as everyone uses AI to predict the future changes because of adversarial equilibrium. So maybe what one mode of working is a tournament of ventures. Another mode is to simulate a tournament of internal policies. And these policies I'm referring to the type of decisions, strategic decisions that Rich Bettis and I studied is about whether and when to intervene by doing what. And that can be simulated across organizations with various architectural designs and competing in a high velocity red queen environment. So my takeaway point. So this is my takeaway point.
Thank you.
Yes. So in this synthetic causal lab, we're going to go from observational science to synthetic science. So instead of observing a firm's success failure, we can build 10,000 digital twin organizations populated with multiple Homo silicus. And you can run experiments, you can do observations, but the future of strategy is about building engines that stress test strategic thinking. And to conclude, right, I'm shifting from structural causal modeling to synthetic causal maps, both SCM. But the idea is that for the future, the simulation will be submitted to peer review and for reviewers to hit play on the submission. And after it's published, the code's open for replication. And that is when I say a theory, if it's replicable, then it is a mechanism. Otherwise, it's just a narrative. So thank you for your attention. Then I stop here.
Thank you so much, Gwen. Phanish, I'm handing over to you.
Okay, just a second. I need to stop sharing.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. What we're doing here is basically a forecasting exercise, right? We're trying to look into the future. And I think as a good forecaster, one must honestly state the limits of what period are we forecasting for. So I think, we can talk with some confidence about what's likely to happen in 2, 5, maybe 10 years. Beyond that, honestly, I don't know. I'm not sure many people do. So given that time window, I have really 2 questions to place before this audience. So the first question is, can we conceive of organizations without humans becoming an important organizational form in this time window? And, you can say some parts of that look plausible. Sam Altman actually claimed last year that there would be the first $1 billion one-person company on the table by December 2025. We are in March 2026. It hasn't happened. So, of course, many, many things can be automated. But is the question reasonable to ask at all? And do we think the answer can be yes in this window? My personal view is no. And the reason is that there are technical reasons why there are large barriers to automating many things that people do. That includes simply power consumption, data access, things like that. But beyond the idea of what AI can technically do, right, there is also the question of social acceptability. So everyone understands, I think, in this group what the Turing test is. So this is the idea of, the less glamorous version of the Turing test is the blind Coke Pepsi test, right? Essentially, we don't know what it is we're drinking. Can we tell is it Coke or Pepsi? Same spirit. But that's basically a test of technical competence of the AI systems. And even if that improves a lot, it's not the only test, right? The other test we have to think about, you might think of as the social acceptability test. And maybe we call it in the honor of Max Weber to twin it with Turing. So the Weber test would be, I can see if the output I'm getting is from a human and a machine or a machine. The quality is identical on measurable dimensions, and yet I have a preference for one over the other on pure legitimacy and normative appropriateness grounds. So that's quite a severe barrier, I think. So it means for the foreseeable future, we are still talking about organizations with humans in them. So that brings me to my second question, which is what is interesting for strategy folks. Can we imagine these organizations achieving competitive advantage without firm-specific human capital? And again, it is plausible, right? You can imagine you're sitting on a gold mine or an oil field or a search engine or some technology platform. Okay. But for most firms, this is not the case. So ultimately, the competitive advantage, to the extent they have any, for most organizations is still very much likely to be tied to human capital. Okay. And that immediately makes several things, I think, very clear in terms of what's important for strategy. So if you accept this idea that even in businesses like platform businesses or take Uber, for example, it's not the case that these are businesses whose success is independent of firm-specific human capital. It just retreats to a small part of the organization where the engineers and the scientists and the data miners live, but it's still important. And I think that has very clear implications for strategy that I want to dwell on. So first, for firms, I think the big point I want to make here is that AI deployment choices are implicitly human capital policies. So we might not think about it explicitly that way, but every time we deploy an AI system, we are making some decisions implicitly about displacement, about productivity, which means which skills become important, about task creation, which means which new skills are required. All of these things are happening in the background, and I think that's a very important thing for strategists to recognize. So which means some core issues in strategic human capital, right, which were always important, perhaps are becoming even more important. So I'm talking about things like what I would describe broadly as skill dynamics. So the idea of co-specialization between humans and AI and humans and technology, ideas around absorptive capacity, ideas like meta skills. These are skills that allow you to rapidly acquire new skills, which is bound to be important in a world in which tasks are fluctuating all the time. Tutor effects of technology. So technology doesn't necessarily only de-skill, it can educate while you deploy. And that's quite unique, I think, to generative AI. So not all of these concepts are new and they don't need to be. I'm just highlighting that they're actually, in some sense, more important, paradoxically, in a world in which AI does many things people do. So it may well be that organizations downscale, but at the same time, they may upskill. So a lot of the skill dynamics we're talking about here probably become central topics in strategy. And perhaps just as important is the management of motivation. So if the human capital needed to create firm-specific human capital and competitive advantage remain important, then attraction, retention, engagement become super important. And we have to think more broadly about incentives beyond things like cash, right? So if you haven't already done it, I would recommend you to look at the work of Ruskov, Krasinski, my friend Isabel Fernando Matias, who's here. So these are scholars who've been working on these topics for a long time. And I think their work has become, if anything, far more important than it ever was, given a world in which AI paradoxically can do many things that humans can. What does it mean for researchers? And I wrote a brief article kind of laying out some ideas for incoming PhD students that I'm happy to share with you. It's more a rant than an article, to be honest. But the surprising thing I want to point out from that article is the implications are surprisingly similar. Okay, they're similar in the sense that, just as I said, there are technical reasons why AI can replace humans or cannot, but there are also normative acceptability reasons that act as barriers to displacement of humans. And this is true for our field as well, right? So strategy among social sciences and is a small handful of fields like this where we're studying humans, but the theories we produce are for consumption by other humans who must understand and deploy them. So of course, mechanism is important, but narrative is also important because narrative is what allows coordination and engagement and implementation. So that is an important property, which means even if AI technically could do every step in the research process better than humans, right? And personally, I think that they may not be that far off. Even if that were true, the role for humans in the process of research, I think, remains extremely important, right? Which means the game is again back to co-specialization. But I'll end with the point that I'm a little more optimistic about the risk of homogenization, right? It is a real risk. If everybody uses AI and the AI is kind of generic, then of course we lose valuable diversity and converge to the same thing. But what any user of GPT must have also realized, the longer you use these tools, the more co-specialized they become to you. Okay, and that's because they're gathering a lot of context based on your interaction with these machines, which means that two people who've been using ChatGPT for 2 years today, when they ask the same question, are going to get very different responses. So there's also some heterogeneity enhancement going on, not just homogenization. And understanding how that works, understanding how to treat these tools as a kind of cognitive prosthetic. So you co-specialize in a way that the machine does better than you what you don't do well, and you do what you better than the machine currently. You think of it as a tutor, not just as a tool, so it upskills while you use. These are, I think, very important questions for individuals to think about as well as researchers and not just in the context of firms. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to open the floor for questions that the audience might have to our panelists. So please feel free to raise your hand if you have a question, and I would ask you to have it as a short, concise question because we are a little bit short on time, and I want to make sure that your questions get answered. Would anyone like to raise a question? Otherwise, I will start with one. I will start with a brief question. So we heard a little bit about what does that mean for PhD students and future generations. If any of you have like additional thoughts, and like Phanish is sharing like his article, which is a wonderful resource, and I highly recommend reading this. But any of the other panelists, what will change for incoming PhD students today or over the next couple of years compared to students like who just started a couple of years ago? What main advice would you like to give them?
I think there's much more room for creativity because there are all these new opportunities. There's so much new things to do. So somehow spend more time exploring things that we don't know yet. Exploration becomes more important at this point in time rather than imitating someone else.
Thank you. Anyone like that? Gwen.
Yeah, if I could jump in. So I have been so happy with my PhD students in my PhD research seminar, and it is transforming how the PhD students are prepared. So my recommendation for the beginning first year and second year, yes, I agree to everything that Phanish recommends in his Medium article, but I think going back to this, the causal map, I think for the first year and the second years, the ability to manually curate the specific articles that you set as the model papers and the preceding foundation and the subsequent development, that should not be outsourced to any tools. I think manually that is important. Then, once you have that as a foundation, then you can approach for speed. But the inbound, I think that development needs to be carefully done and used time preciously, not to rush, but to build that foundation knowledge map.
Following up on this, do you see, maybe Alexa, I'll just enrich that question a little bit. Do you foresee like PhD seminars and classes to take a different form? Vivianna. You don't have to answer that question in particular, but
I think you will take a different form. But I wanted to build on the previous two comments about the time. With any new tool, you will save time in some tasks. As for firms and for researchers, the key question becomes how you invest your saved time. Because with operational efficiency rising, it's the water level rising. Just saving time, you will not become more competitive. Then it's about how you invest your time to explore and do new things that are previously impossible. So it's how you transform your business, both either as a researcher or as a firm. Yeah, that related to your question, Daniel, about PhD seminars. I don't know whether this can be taught in a PhD seminar. I think as educators, we want to focus on that transformational side. The question of how is a bit hard to answer.
would anyone like to say a few closing remarks? Otherwise, I will respect the time of Phanish. You unmuted.
No, I just wanted to say thank you for organizing.
So let me thank everyone here, the audience. It was a wonderful turnout, which is due to the wonderful, prestigious panelists. I learned a lot, and I would love to have longer talks with all of you. And I'm probably going to hunt you down at Academy or other opportunities. And I'm sure many of the audience will do the same thing. There's much to be learned, and I think it was very inspiring in terms of methods, but also rethinking like what questions we may ask and which questions we are maybe looking at it from a different angle. So thank you for pushing this conversation a little bit further. It's far from being answered. I think that became very clear, and I'm looking forward to continue this conversation with all of you. Thank you so much, and a round of virtual applause to our wonderful panelists. Thank you so much.